Let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever noticed that two people can start in almost the exact same place but end up with completely different lives? One person builds a successful business, earns good money, creates opportunities, and seems to keep moving forward. The other works just as hard, maybe even harder, but stays stuck year after year. Most people explain this by saying things like luck, talent, connections, or being born into the right family. And sure, those things matter, but according to Napoleon Hill, they're not the main reason. After spending more than 20 years studying some of the most successful people of his time, Hill came to a surprising conclusion. Success doesn't begin in your bank account. It doesn't begin with your education. It doesn't begin with your job title. It begins in your mind. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is going to be one of those just think positive and you'll become rich speeches, stay with me. That's not what Hill meant. He wasn't saying that sitting on your couch and imagining money will magically make you wealthy. What he was saying was much more practical. Your thoughts determine your actions determine your habits determine your results, and over time, those results become your life. Think about it. Every building starts as an idea. Every company starts as an idea. Every invention starts as an idea. Nothing exists physically until it first exists mentally. The problem is that most people never learn how to direct their thinking toward a clear goal. Instead, they spend their lives reacting to whatever happens around them. One day they're motivated, the next day they're discouraged. One day they're excited about a new opportunity, the next day they're convinced it won't work. Their direction changes with their mood, and that's why progress becomes impossible. Imagine getting into a car and deciding to drive across the country. You don't know where you're going, you don't have a map, you don't have a destination, you just start driving. Would you ever arrive? Of course not. Yet that's exactly how many people live. They say they want success, they say they want freedom, they say they want more money, but when you ask them exactly what they want, the answer becomes vague. I just want to be comfortable. I want a better life. I want to make more money. Compared to successful people, that's a huge difference. People who achieve extraordinary things tend to know exactly what they're aiming for. Not eventually, not someday, right now. They have a target. And because they have a target, their decisions become easier. Every opportunity gets measured against the goal. Every distraction becomes easier to reject. Every setback becomes easier to endure because they know where they're going. One of the biggest lessons from Think and Grow Rich is that wishing is not the same as deciding. Everybody wishes, almost nobody decides. People wish they were healthier. People wish they had more money. People wish they had better relationships. People wish they had more confidence, but wishing requires nothing. Deciding changes everything. The moment you make a real decision, you stop looking for excuses. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop hoping somebody else will rescue you. You take responsibility for creating the future you want. And that's where most people get stuck, because responsibility is uncomfortable. It's easier to blame the economy. It's easier to blame your boss. It's easier to blame your family. It's easier to blame your past. And sometimes those things genuinely make life harder. Nobody's denying that. But Hill noticed that successful people focus their energy differently. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they asked, "What can I do next?" That question changes everything because it shifts your attention from problems to possibilities. Let's be honest, life is never fair. Some people start ahead, some people start behind. Some people get opportunities that others never receive. That's reality. But Hill wasn't interested in what people couldn't control. He was interested in what they could control. Your attitude, your effort, your focus, your willingness to keep moving. Those things belong to you, and over the long run, they matter more than most people think. Look at almost any successful entrepreneur. At some point, they failed. At some point, they got rejected. At some point, somebody told them their idea was stupid. The difference wasn't that successful people never faced obstacles. The difference was that obstacles didn't become permanent excuses. They kept going. Most people overestimate the importance of one failure. Successful people understand that failure is usually temporary. Imagine a baby learning to walk. The baby falls, then falls again, thousands of times. Nobody looks at a baby and says, "Well, I guess walking isn't for you." That would be ridiculous. Yet adults do this all the time. One business fails, one investment loses money, one job application gets rejected, one relationship ends, and suddenly they conclude they're not capable. Hill believed that persistence separates dreamers from achievers, not intelligence, not talent, not luck. Persistence, the ability to continue after disappointment, the ability to keep working when results haven't appeared yet, the ability to stay committed when excitement fades. Because here's something most people never realize: the world doesn't reward interest, it rewards commitment. Lots of people are interested in success, very few are committed to it. Lots of people are interested in becoming wealthy, very few are willing to develop the discipline required. Lots of people want extraordinary results, very few want to do ordinary things consistently for years. That's why success often looks mysterious from the outside. People see the outcome, they don't see the preparation. They see the victory, they don't see the struggle. They see the wealth, they don't see the sacrifices. And because they don't see those things, they assume successful people got lucky. Sometimes luck helps, but luck rarely explains sustained success. Consistent thinking leads to consistent action. Consistent action leads to consistent results. That's the pattern Hill saw over and over again. At the heart of Think and Grow Rich is a simple but powerful idea. Your future is shaped more by the direction of your thoughts than by the circumstances of your past. You can't change yesterday. You can't control every obstacle. You can't guarantee success. But you can choose what you're aiming for. You can choose how you respond to setbacks. You can choose whether you keep moving forward. And according to Napoleon Hill, that choice is where every success story begins. Because before someone becomes wealthy, influential, or accomplished, they first become the kind of person who believes it's possible and then acts like it. That's the real starting point. Not money, not opportunity, not luck. A decision. If above was about knowing where you want to go, then next is about answering an even more important question. How badly do you want to get there? Because according to Napoleon Hill, every great achievement begins with one thing: a burning desire. Not a wish, not a preference, not a "that would be nice." A burning desire. And there's a huge difference between the people who merely want something and the people who absolutely refuse to live without it. Think about it. Most people say they want more money, but do they really? Or do they simply like the idea of having more money? Those are two completely different things. Lots of people would love to be wealthy. Lots of people would love to start a business. Lots of people would love to get in shape. Lots of people would love to write a book. But when challenges show up, those desires disappear. Why? Because they weren't desires, they were preferences. A preference disappears when things get difficult. A burning desire survives difficulty. That's why Hill starts his entire success philosophy with desire. Because desire creates energy. Desire creates persistence. Desire creates focus. Without desire, people quit the moment life gets uncomfortable. With desire, people find a way forward. Hill often pointed to stories of people who achieved extraordinary success despite overwhelming odds. One of the most famous examples in the book is a man named Edwin Barnes. Now, Barnes wasn't wealthy. He wasn't famous. He wasn't highly educated. In fact, he had very little going for him on paper. But he had one thing: a burning desire to work with the great inventor Thomas Edison. Not for him, not near him, with him. Most people would have laughed at the idea. Barnes had no connections, no money, no obvious path. But he became obsessed with the goal. Eventually, he found a way to get in front of Edison. The first opportunity wasn't glamorous. He didn't become a business partner overnight. He started small, very small, but he stayed focused. He kept proving himself, and over time, he earned the opportunity he originally dreamed about. The lesson isn't really about Edison. The lesson is about commitment. Most people stop when they don't see an immediate path. Barnes focused on the destination and figured out the path later. That's what strong desire does. It keeps you moving before all the answers appear. And that's something modern culture often gets wrong. People think motivation comes first, then action. Hill believed the opposite was often true. Action creates motivation. Progress creates confidence. Momentum creates belief. You don't wait until you feel ready. You start moving, then readiness follows. Look around at successful people. Most of them didn't begin with certainty. They began with conviction. There's a difference. Certainty means knowing you'll succeed. Conviction means moving forward even though you don't know. Most people are waiting for certainty. That's why they never start. They're waiting for the perfect business idea, the perfect market, the perfect timing, the perfect opportunity, the perfect economy, the perfect plan. Meanwhile, years go by. The people who succeed understand something important. There is no perfect time. There is only now. Every successful entrepreneur you've ever heard of started before they felt fully prepared. Every successful creator published work that wasn't perfect. Every successful investor made mistakes. Every successful leader experienced self-doubt. The difference is they didn't let uncertainty stop them. Hill believed desire gives people the ability to push through uncertainty, because when the goal matters enough, fear becomes smaller. Not gone, smaller. And that's an important distinction. Fear never completely disappears. Even successful people feel fear. They just don't obey it. Think about someone standing at the edge of a diving board. They're nervous. Their heart is racing. Their mind is filled with doubts. But eventually they jump. What changed? The fear didn't disappear. Their decision became stronger than their fear. That's what desire does. It creates a reason powerful enough to act despite discomfort. One of Hill's most practical lessons involves getting specific. He noticed that successful people rarely chase vague goals. They define exactly what they want. Most people say, "I want more money." Successful people say, "I want to earn $100,000, or "I want to build a company generating $1 million per year." Specific goals create specific actions. Vague goals create vague results. Imagine telling a taxi driver, "Take me somewhere nice." Where do you end up? Who knows? Now imagine saying, "Take me to this exact address." The journey becomes clear. Your mind works the same way. The clearer the destination, the easier it becomes to identify opportunities. That's why Hill encouraged readers to write their goals down. Not because writing is magical, because writing creates clarity, and clarity creates action. Something interesting happens when you commit a goal to paper. It stops being a fantasy. It becomes an objective, a mission, a target. And once you have a target, your brain starts looking for ways to reach it. Have you ever decided to buy a particular car and suddenly started seeing that car everywhere? The cars were always there. You just started paying attention. The same thing happens with opportunities. When your goal becomes clear, opportunities become easier to recognize. Not because the world changed, because your focus changed. Hill believed this was one of the hidden advantages of desire. Desire sharpens attention. It filters distractions. It helps people stay focused on what matters. Without desire, every obstacle feels enormous. With desire, obstacles become problems to solve. That's why two people can face the exact same challenge and react completely differently. One sees a dead end, the other sees a detour. One sees rejection, the other sees feedback. One sees failure, the other sees a lesson. The situation is identical, the mindset is different. And mindset influences behavior. Behavior influences outcomes. This is where many people misunderstand success. They think successful people are somehow different from everyone else. Hill believed the opposite was often true. Successful people simply developed stronger desires and stronger commitments. They weren't necessarily smarter. They weren't necessarily luckier. They weren't necessarily more talented, but they became relentless. They stayed focused longer. They persisted longer. They recovered faster. And over time, those advantages compounded. A weak desire produces weak effort. A strong desire produces extraordinary persistence. That's why Hill considered desire the starting point of achievement. Not money, not education, not resources. Desire. Because when a person develops a goal that truly matters to them, something changes. Excuses become less convincing. Obstacles become less intimidating. Fear loses some of its power, and action becomes much more likely. The people who accomplish remarkable things aren't always the most gifted. Often, they're simply the ones who wanted it badly enough to keep going when everyone else stopped. That's the power of desire. It's the spark that starts the journey, and without it, none of the other principles in Think and Grow Rich can work. Let's talk about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable: faith. The moment people hear that word, they often assume we're talking about religion, but that's not exactly what Napoleon Hill meant. When Hill talks about faith in Think and Grow Rich, he's talking about belief. More specifically, belief in yourself, belief in your goal, belief that what you're working toward is possible. And whether people realize it or not, this belief affects almost every decision they make. Think about someone applying for a job. One person walks into the interview thinking, I'm probably not qualified. They'll never hire someone like me. There are better candidates. Another person walks into the exact same interview thinking, I belong here. I have something valuable to offer. I'm capable of doing this job. Who do you think performs better? The interesting part is that both people may have the same qualifications. The difference isn't skill. The difference is belief. And belief changes behavior. That's one of Hill's biggest ideas. What you consistently believe about yourself eventually becomes visible in your actions. If you believe you're capable, you'll take more chances. If you believe you're capable, you'll recover faster from setbacks. If you believe you're capable, you'll continue moving when others quit. On the other hand, if you constantly doubt yourself, you'll hesitate. You'll second-guess decisions. You'll avoid opportunities. You'll talk yourself out of taking action. The tragedy is that most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they convince themselves they're incapable. And that's a completely different problem. Have you ever noticed how many people reject themselves before the world even gets a chance to? They don't start the business because they assume it won't work. They don't ask for the promotion because they assume they'll be rejected. They don't approach the opportunity because they assume they're not good enough. The answer is already no before they even try. Hill believed that lack of faith creates invisible barriers. Nothing physically stops people, but mentally they've already surrendered. That's why faith matters. Not because faith magically changes reality, because faith changes behavior, and behavior changes outcomes. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. The first time you get on, you're probably nervous. You wobble, you fall, you lose balance. But imagine if after the first fall you concluded, I'm just not a bicycle person. You'd never learn. The only reason people eventually ride confidently is because they continue despite early failures. They believe improvement is possible. Without that belief, progress stops immediately. The same thing happens in business. The same thing happens in careers. The same thing happens in relationships. The same thing happens in life. Most success stories involve a period where nothing seems to be working. No results, no recognition, no evidence, just effort. This is where faith becomes important, because when external proof is missing, internal belief keeps you moving. Think about some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. Before anyone believed in them, they had to believe in themselves. Before customers showed up, they kept building. Before investors showed interest, they kept pitching. Before the market validated their idea, they kept working. If they had waited for outside validation first, they never would have started. That's one of the paradoxes of success. People often expect confidence to come before action, but confidence usually comes after action. You don't become confident and then start. You start, and confidence gradually develops. Hill understood this. That's why he spent so much time discussing faith, because belief isn't something you're born with, it's something you build. Most people think confidence is a personality trait. They think some people naturally have it and some don't. But confidence is often the result of repeated experiences. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens confidence. Every challenge you overcome strengthens confidence. Every obstacle you survive strengthens confidence. Confidence grows through evidence. The problem is that most people collect evidence against themselves. They focus on failures. They focus on mistakes. They focus on weaknesses. They replay embarrassing moments over and over again. Imagine carrying a notebook everywhere you go. Every time you succeed, you ignore it. Every time you fail, you write it down. Eventually, you'd convince yourself you're a failure. That's exactly what many people do mentally. They remember every setback, they forget every victory. Hill believed successful people train their minds differently. They intentionally focus on possibilities rather than limitations, not because they're delusional, because attention influences belief, and belief influences action. This brings us to one of the most powerful ideas in the entire book. Your brain listens to you. Not literally, of course, but the stories you repeat become your reality. If you constantly say, I'm terrible with money, I'll never succeed, I'm not smart enough, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm unlucky, eventually those statements stop feeling like opinions. They start feeling like facts. And once something feels like a fact, your behavior begins to align with it. That's why negative self-talk is so dangerous. It doesn't stay in your head. It leaks into your decisions. It affects your effort. It affects your persistence. It affects your willingness to take risks. On the other hand, people with strong faith create a different internal conversation. They don't pretend obstacles don't exist. They simply refuse to define themselves by those obstacles. Instead of saying, I failed, they say that attempt failed. Instead of saying, I'm not good at this, they say, I'm not good at this yet. One single word changes everything. Yet. That tiny word leaves room for growth. Hill believed growth begins the moment people stop treating their current situation as permanent. Because the truth is, most skills are learnable. Most weaknesses are improvable. Most limitations are temporary. The person you are today is not the person you have to remain. That's why faith matters so much. Faith isn't pretending you're already successful. Faith is believing that with enough effort, learning, adaptation, and persistence, you can become more capable than you are right now. It's the belief that your future doesn't have to look like your past. And that belief is incredibly powerful. Because once people genuinely believe improvement is possible, they start behaving differently. They take action, they learn faster, they persist longer, they recover quicker. And eventually, those small behavioral differences create dramatically different results. Hill's message is simple but profound. Before the world believes in you, you must believe in yourself. Before success becomes visible on the outside, it must exist on the inside. Because every achievement starts twice. First in the mind, then in reality. And faith is the bridge between the two. Have you ever noticed how some thoughts seem to live rent-free in your head? Maybe it was something a teacher said years ago. Maybe it was a comment from a parent. Maybe it was a criticism from someone you respected. You may not even remember exactly when you heard it, but somehow it stayed with you. And the strange thing is, those words can influence your behavior for years. A kid gets told he's bad at math. Years later, he still avoids anything involving numbers. Someone gets rejected a few times while dating. Eventually, they start believing they're unattractive. An entrepreneur launches a business that fails. Suddenly, they begin to think they're not meant for business. The event happened once, but the story gets repeated thousands of times. And according to Napoleon Hill, that's exactly how the mind works. The thoughts you repeatedly feed your brain eventually become beliefs. That's the foundation of what Hill called autosuggestion. Now, let's clear up a common misunderstanding. Autosuggestion is not magic. It isn't standing in front of a mirror and saying, I'm a millionaire, until money falls from the sky. Hill wasn't suggesting that positive thinking alone creates success. What he was saying is much more practical. Your brain is constantly being programmed. The question is, who's doing the programming? Because whether you realize it or not, you're talking to yourself all day long. You may not hear the voice consciously, but it's there. I can't do that. I'm not qualified. People like me never succeed. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm not confident enough. Those messages don't disappear. They become instructions, and over time, your actions begin to follow them. Think about it this way. Imagine planting seeds in a garden. If you plant tomato seeds, you get tomatoes. If you plant weeds, you get weeds. Your mind works similarly. The thoughts you consistently plant eventually grow. Unfortunately, most people allow negative thoughts to grow without questioning them. Someone criticizes them once, they replay it for years. Someone doubts them once, they turn that doubt into an identity. Someone rejects them once, they convince themselves they're not worthy. Hill believed this was one of the biggest hidden obstacles to success, not lack of intelligence, not lack of opportunity, negative mental conditioning. Because once people accept a limiting belief, they start acting as if it's true, and that's where things become dangerous. Imagine two people starting a business. The first person thinks, this is going to be difficult, but I can figure it out. The second person thinks, this probably won't work. Both face the same challenges. Both encounter setbacks. Both make mistakes. But who is more likely to keep going? The answer is obvious. The person who believes success is possible, not guaranteed, possible. That's the key. Belief affects persistence. Persistence affects results. Results reinforce belief, and suddenly a cycle begins, a positive one or a negative one. Most people underestimate how powerful this cycle can be. Let's say someone starts going to the gym. The first week is hard. The second week is hard. Nothing seems to change. If they keep telling themselves, this isn't working, I'll never get in shape, I always quit, eventually they stop. But imagine another person. They tell themselves, I'm improving, I'm becoming stronger, this takes time. The workouts are identical. The difference is the story, and the story influences whether they continue. Hill believed successful people become extremely careful about the stories they tell themselves, because eventually those stories become reality. This is why he encouraged readers to repeatedly review their goals, not once, not occasionally, daily. The goal wasn't simply memorization. The goal was conditioning. Hill understood something modern psychology later confirmed. The brain pays attention to repetition. What you hear repeatedly begins to feel familiar. What feels familiar begins to feel true. And what feels true influences behavior. Look at advertising. Companies spend billions of dollars repeating the same messages. Why? Because repetition works. If you see a brand enough times, it becomes familiar. If it becomes familiar, you're more likely to trust it. The same principle applies internally. Every thought repeated often enough becomes more believable. That's why successful people guard their minds extremely carefully. They're selective about what they consume. They're selective about who they listen to. They're selective about the ideas they reinforce, because they understand that every repeated message shapes their thinking, and thinking shapes action. Now, here's where many people get this wrong. They assume autosuggestion means ignoring reality. It doesn't. Hill wasn't saying you should pretend problems don't exist. If you're broke, you're broke. If your business is struggling, it's struggling. If you're behind, you're behind. Reality matters, but your interpretation of reality matters too. Two people can face the same setback. One says, this proves I'm a failure. The other says, this is part of the process. Same event, different interpretation, different future. That's why successful people often appear unusually resilient. It's not because they avoid difficulties, it's because they frame difficulties differently. Where others see evidence to quit, they see evidence to learn. Where others see defeat, they see feedback. Where others see a dead end, they see a challenge. And that mindset isn't accidental, it's trained. Over time, through repetition, through self-talk, through deliberate focus, through auto-suggestion. Think about elite athletes. Before a major competition, many visualize success. They imagine making the shot, crossing the finish line, executing the perfect performance. Why? Because the brain responds to mental rehearsal. They're training their minds before the event even begins. Entrepreneurs do the same thing. Great speakers do it. Top performers in every field do it. They consciously choose the thoughts they want to reinforce because they understand that every performance starts in the mind long before it becomes visible in reality. Hill believed the greatest battle most people face isn't against competitors, it isn't against the economy, it isn't against bad luck, it's against their own thinking. Because if your mind constantly works against you, success becomes much harder. But if your mind supports your goals, everything changes. You still have obstacles, you still have setbacks, you still have uncertainty, but now you have an internal ally instead of an internal enemy, and that advantage compounds over time. The biggest takeaway from autosuggestion is simple. You become what you repeatedly tell yourself. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, day after day, thought after thought, decision after decision. Your mind is always listening. The question is whether you're feeding it beliefs that move you closer to your goals or farther away from them. Because long before success appears in your bank account, your business, or your career, it first appears in your thinking. And the thoughts you repeat today may very well become the reality you live tomorrow. There's a popular myth about success. The image usually looks something like this: a lone genius sitting in a garage, a self-made entrepreneur building an empire completely by themselves, a visionary who ignored everyone, trusted only their instincts, and conquered the world alone. It's a great story. The problem is that it's rarely true. According to Napoleon Hill, one of the biggest reasons people fail isn't lack of intelligence, lack of money, or lack of opportunity. It's trying to do everything alone. Hill called this idea the mastermind principle, and he believed it was one of the most powerful success principles in the entire book. The concept is surprisingly simple. When two or more people work together toward a common goal, their combined knowledge, experience, and creativity become far greater than what any one person could achieve alone. In other words, the right people multiply your potential, the wrong people limit it. Think about almost every major success story you've ever heard. Behind every successful entrepreneur, there were mentors, partners, employees, advisors, customers, investors, supporters, or friends. Nobody builds anything meaningful completely alone. Even the most independent people rely on others. Yet many people spend years trying to solve every problem by themselves. They refuse to ask for help. They refuse to seek advice. They refuse to learn from people who have already done what they want to do. And as a result, progress becomes painfully slow. Imagine trying to navigate through a giant forest. One person has a map, another person has a compass, another person knows where the dangers are, another person knows where the dangers are. Wouldn't it make sense to work together? Of course it would. Yet in life, people often do the opposite. They insist on figuring out everything from scratch, not because it's effective, because their ego gets in the way. Hill understood something many people don't. Success is rarely about knowing all the answers. It's about knowing where to find the answers. The smartest people aren't necessarily the people with the most knowledge. They're often the people who know how to access the knowledge of others. Take business as an example. No entrepreneur is an expert at everything. Someone might be great at creating products, but terrible at marketing. Someone else might be an amazing salesperson, but weak with finances. Someone else might understand operations, but struggle with leadership. Trying to master every skill yourself is not only difficult, it's unnecessary. The faster you recognize your limitations, the faster you can find people who complement your strengths. And that's exactly what successful people do. Instead of asking, "How can I do everything myself?" they ask, "Who can help me achieve this goal faster and better?" That single question changes everything because it shifts your focus from individual effort to collective intelligence. Now let's talk about something even more important. The people around you don't just influence your knowledge, they influence your beliefs. This may be one of the most underrated forces in life. Human beings naturally absorb the attitudes of their environment. Spend enough time around optimistic people and you'll become more optimistic. Spend enough time around ambitious people and your ambitions will grow. Spend enough time around disciplined people and discipline begins to feel normal. The opposite is also true. Spend enough time around negativity and negativity starts feeling normal. Spend enough time around excuses and excuses become easier to justify. Spend enough time around people who constantly complain, and eventually you'll find yourself doing the same thing. Whether we like it or not, environments shape behavior. Think about this. Have you ever left a conversation feeling energized? You suddenly had new ideas, new motivation, new possibilities. You felt excited about the future. Now think about the opposite. Have you ever talked to someone who drained all your energy? Someone who immediately found a reason why every idea wouldn't work? Someone who could turn optimism into pessimism within 5 minutes? Those interactions matter more than most people realize because energy is contagious, beliefs are contagious, standards are contagious. Hill believed that one of the smartest decisions you can make is carefully choosing the people who influence your thinking, not because you should avoid everyone who disagrees with you, but because constant exposure to negativity eventually affects anyone, even strong-minded people. This is why high achievers often spend enormous amounts of time around other high achievers. It's not because they're trying to be exclusive, it's because environment matters. When everyone around you is working hard feels normal. When everyone around you is setting goals feels normal. When everyone around you is growing, growth feels normal. Your standards naturally rise. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming they can maintain extraordinary ambitions while surrounding themselves with people who discourage ambition. That's extremely difficult. The environment usually wins. That's why Hill encouraged readers to intentionally build mastermind groups, small groups of people committed to helping each other succeed. People who share ideas, people who offer feedback, people who challenge blind spots, people who hold each other accountable. Because sometimes the biggest thing standing between you and success isn't effort, it's perspective. You can't see your own blind spots. Everyone has them. That's where trusted advisors become valuable. They see things you don't. They notice mistakes you miss. They identify opportunities you've overlooked, and often a single insight can save years of frustration. Think about professional athletes. Even the best athletes in the world have coaches, not because they aren't talented, because coaching creates improvement. If elite performers need guidance, why would anyone else assume they can succeed entirely alone? The truth is, independence is valuable, but isolation is dangerous. There's a difference. Independent people take responsibility for their lives. Isolated people reject support. One creates strength, the other creates unnecessary struggle. Hill believed that success becomes much easier when people combine their efforts, knowledge, and experiences. Not because teamwork guarantees victory, because teamwork increases probability. You gain access to more ideas, more opportunities, more resources, more solutions, and perhaps most importantly, more encouragement during difficult times. Because everyone experiences moments of doubt, everyone faces setbacks, everyone questions themselves occasionally. During those moments, the right people can make an enormous difference. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "Keep going, you're closer than you think. Don't quit yet." Those words can change a life. The biggest takeaway from the mastermind principle is simple. Your future is heavily influenced by the people you spend time with, the conversations you have, the advice you listen to, the standards you accept, the relationships you build. Success is not a solo game. It never has been. The strongest individuals are often the ones who understand the power of collaboration, because while talent may help you move fast, the right people help you move farther. And in the long run, going farther matters a lot more than going fast. If there is one lesson that appears again and again throughout Think and Grow Rich, it's this. Most people quit far too soon. Not because they're incapable, not because their goals are impossible, not because success isn't available to them. They quit because they underestimate how long success actually takes. And according to Napoleon Hill, persistence is often the single factor that separates those who achieve their dreams from those who spend their lives wondering what could have been. Think about how most people approach a new goal. At the beginning, they're excited. The business idea feels promising. The fitness plan feels achievable. The new career path feels inspiring. Everything seems possible. Then reality shows up. The first setback happens. The first rejection arrives. The first unexpected obstacle appears. Suddenly, the excitement starts fading. And that's the moment when most people begin negotiating with themselves. Maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe the goal is unrealistic. Maybe somebody else could do it, but not me. Maybe I should try something easier. Sound familiar? Almost everyone has had those thoughts. The problem isn't having doubts. The problem is allowing those doubts to become decisions. Hill noticed something fascinating during his study of successful people. Many of their biggest breakthroughs happened shortly after periods of disappointment. In other words, they were often much closer to success than they realized, but they couldn't see it at the time. And that's one of the cruelest realities of achievement. When you're making progress, it doesn't always feel like progress. Imagine planting a seed in the ground. For days, nothing happens. Then weeks pass. Still nothing. From the outside, it looks like failure. But underneath the surface, roots are developing. Growth is happening where nobody can see it. Success often works the same way. People expect visible results immediately. When those results don't appear, they assume their efforts are wasted. But many important changes happen long before the rewards become visible. Skills improve, knowledge grows, confidence develops, relationships form, opportunities quietly begin to emerge. The problem is that most people stop before these hidden investments have time to pay off. That's why persistence matters. Persistence bridges the gap between effort and results. Without persistence, potential means nothing. Talent means nothing. Intelligence means nothing, because none of those things matter if you quit. Think about some of the most successful people in history. They all experienced failure. Many experienced repeated failure. Walt Disney was told he lacked creativity. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times while developing practical electric lighting. Colonel Harlan Sanders faced countless rejections before building what became KFC. What if they had stopped after the first failure, or the fifth, or the 50th? The world would never know their names. Persistence doesn't guarantee success, but quitting almost guarantees failure. That's the difference. Hill believed that failure itself is not the enemy. The real enemy is discouragement, because discouragement causes people to abandon goals that might have succeeded if given more time. Now let's be clear. Persistence doesn't mean blindly repeating the same mistakes forever. That's not persistence. That's stubbornness. Successful people adapt. They change strategies. They learn new skills. They seek better information. They improve their methods. What they don't do is abandon their objective at the first sign of difficulty. There's a huge difference. Imagine trying to climb a mountain. If one path is blocked, you don't necessarily give up on reaching the summit. You look for another route. The destination stays the same. The method changes. That's intelligent persistence, and it's one of the most important skills anyone can develop. Another reason people quit too early is because they compare their beginning to someone else's middle. Social media has made this problem even worse. People see successful businesses, successful investors, successful creators, successful athletes, but they rarely see the years of struggle that came before the success. They see Chapter 20 and compare it to their own Chapter 1. Naturally, they feel discouraged. But every expert was once a beginner. Every successful company started small. Every accomplished person was once inexperienced. The difference is they stayed in the game long enough to improve. Hill believed persistence is less about motivation and more about commitment. Motivation comes and goes. Nobody feels motivated every day. Nobody wakes up excited every morning. Nobody stays inspired all the time. If success depended on motivation, almost nobody would succeed. Commitment is different. Commitment means taking action even when you don't feel like it. Commitment means showing up when enthusiasm disappears. Commitment means continuing when progress feels slow. That's where persistence is born. Not during the exciting moments, during the difficult ones, during the boring ones, during the frustrating ones, because those are the moments that eliminate most competitors. Most people are willing to do what's necessary once. Few people are willing to do what's necessary consistently. And consistency is where extraordinary results come from. A single workout won't transform your body. A single investment won't build wealth. A single day of effort won't create mastery. The magic happens through repetition, small actions repeated over long periods of time. That's why persistence often looks unimpressive in the moment. It's simply showing up again and again and again until results finally appear. Hill also believed persistence strengthens character. Every obstacle overcome increases resilience. Every challenge survived increases confidence. Every setback conquered creates evidence that you can handle future difficulties. Over time, persistence transforms people. The person who refuses to quit becomes stronger, wiser, and more capable, not because life became easier, because they became tougher. And that's perhaps the greatest reward of persistence. The goal matters, the achievement matters, the money matters, but the person you become during the journey matters even more. Because success is never just about reaching a destination, it's about developing the qualities required to reach it. At the end of Think and Grow Rich, Hill leaves readers with a powerful realization. Success rarely belongs to the smartest person. It rarely belongs to the most talented person. It rarely belongs to the luckiest person. More often, it belongs to the person who simply stayed in the game longer than everyone else. The person who kept learning, the person who kept adapting, the person who kept believing, the person who refused to quit. Because in the end, persistence turns dreams into plans, plans into action, action into results, and results into the life that once seemed impossible. That's why persistence isn't just another success principle. It's the principle that keeps all the others alive.